Hey everybody, today we are talking about the book versus the adaptation of Plum Pudding Murder by Joanne Fluke. So I am going to be going into quite a bit of detail about the movie as well as the book. So if you haven't read or seen either of these and you are wanting to, then maybe do that first before you watch this. If not, here we go. Basically, I want to tell you a little bit about the similarities and a little bit about the differences. And I think starting with the differences between these two is actually going to be helpful in this instance because the book timeline of all the books is going to be very different from the timeline of the movies. Since there are over 20 of these Hannah Swenson murder mysteries, I doubt that they were thinking that they were going to be making a movie for every single one of the books, and so they were just picking and choosing which ones they thought would be the most interesting for the screen. And so the second book that they actually choose, because they do choose Chocolate Chip Cookie Murder as the first movie, which is the first book, so that is fitting. But after that, they choose Plum Pudding Murder as the second movie, and that is like book 12 out of these books. And so having that be the second movie means that the entire timeline is sped up, sort of. So for example, we have Andrea, who is Hannah's sister, and she, by book 12, by Plum Pudding Murder, she has 2 children, and in the movie version of this, she doesn't even have 1 child yet. And so that is already a very big difference in terms of like how her sister's life has been going over these past 12 books versus just the second movie. Another thing to note is because of that, the relationship between Hannah and Mike is very different. In fact, she actually says to Andrea, who's rooting for her to choose Mike, while her mom is rooting for her to choose Norman, which is similar in the book. However, the push to Mike with Andrea is not so much in the books, but Dolores does often mention to Hannah how she thinks that Norman would be a good fit, and that makes sense because her best friend is his mom. Hannah relays the information that she has not kissed either one of them yet, and of course she, in the book versions, has definitely kissed both of them multiple times at this point. So we're seeing that their relationships are both very small at this point, very underdeveloped on both of the men, like for her relationship in the romantic sense. And so they're both still trying to get dates with her and win her over in a friendly kind of a way. They don't have too much screen time where they're in the same place at the same time. So the movie starts out right away with her being really busy with the hustle and bustle of the holiday season, making all the food in her shop, in the cookie jar. And Lisa's there, of course. In the movie, there are several other people that work there. In the book, it's just the 2 of them. And I did read a review on this book that they had mentioned, how on earth do they make enough money to stay open when they only have 2 people working and Hannah's gone half the time trying to figure out murders? And this is very, very interesting point and true. And even though they show up hours before the shop opens to prep, it does seem like that's a lot of work for one person whenever Hannah leaves Lisa to the shop. And even before that, before Lisa even worked there, Hannah was doing it on her own. And it does seem like they get way too much business for that to be feasible to just have 2 people. So in the movie, they have a crew, and she is preparing all these cookies to go take over to the the Crazy Elf Christmas tree lot. And when she gets there, she's with her sister. They go to go drop off the cookies. She meets Courtney there. Courtney, who is, of course, the fiance of Larry. In the book, Norman buys her a tree. In the movie, Mike ends up being there and happens to buy her a tree 6 minutes before Norman buys her a tree. So the tree she goes home with is Mike's tree, which is a little annoying to me because it was supposed to be Norman, and it should have been Norman. I'm always going to be Team Norman. I don't care how attractive Mike is. Norman is the better match, in my opinion. Anyways, moving on. In the movie version, Dolores is taking this class that in the book version, Carrie's supposed to be taking it with her, and since she keeps flaking, she takes Hannah with her, and she goes and they have classes they have the class together. In the movie, Dolores does not make Hannah go with her, but she does mention that Carrie's been weird and that she hasn't seen her a lot lately. I feel like the whole side story of Carrie dating somebody and not telling anybody about it is a lot more present in the book than it is in the movie. It was very quick. Like the scenes with Carrie in it were very quick. She had hardly any screen time in that movie. And whereas in the book, it's one of the first things that happen. Dolores is very nervous about her friend, worried about her, and asks Hannah to try to figure out what's going on for her because she can't seem to reach her. And so it seems a lot more of an issue in the book than it is in the movie. We also have the whole tree situation where Moisha, the cat, is having a really hard time being able to be around this tree, knocks it over a bunch of times, doesn't really know how to deal with it. Typical cat behavior. But in the movie, nothing happens at all with that storyline. Like, Moisha's fine and doesn't care about the tree whatsoever and leaves it alone the whole time. So that, I guess they just didn't have time to bother with that. These movies are really short, typically under an hour and 30 minutes. So it's not like they're going to go into extra detail over things that don't seem as important to the story, which I understand. So those are some of the big differences. In terms of the similarities, the same person, of course, dies. Larry is the one who ends up being shot. He does get shot. The television gets shot, just like in the book it gets shot. The suspects are all the same. We have the fiance Courtney, we have Dr. Love, who had a past relationship with Larry years prior. There's another suspect that they come up with later, the teacher of the bad business practice class, because she happens to give an example in her homework about a bad business practice, which is a business that Larry used to run a couple years prior. And so there's that. Once Hannah finds that out in the book, that's like a huge stepping point to be like, ooh, we need to look into this. This could be another suspect. And so she's also in there. The same murder as the book is in the movie. Norman and Hannah both find the body in the trailer of the Christmas tree, the crazy Christmas elf tree lot, the headquarters, the crazy elf headquarters. They both still find the body, and Norman is the one who checks the pulse and everything, so that part's the same as the book. The whole idea to giving plum pudding that's like the main point, right? Is making the plum pudding, going and taking over to Larry, receiving her check for the cookies, all that stuff. That is still the same. I will say though, what kind of annoyed me was in the movie version, while she is making the plum pudding, she's making it in individual serving sizes so that it can be a sellable thing versus a whole cake at the Christmas tree lot. And so while she's putting it together though, there's this voiceover and Hannah's saying, oh, the beauty about cooking is that the baker is the one who ultimately decides which fresh take they're gonna put in their recipes, yada yada. And she mentions how this is a traditional Christmas pudding was a traditional English dish. It's around since the 14th century, and the thing about it is you don't even need to use plums. And so she tells her friends that when they're like, oh, it'll probably be really hard to find plums here in Minnesota, right? And she's like, oh, don't worry about it, I'll figure it out. And so she makes it without plums. You know that if you watched my baking and a book review that I did on this, and while I was making it, you know that plums was like the whole point of her making it, is she was gonna make a plum pudding with plums. Like, that was the whole point. And in the movie, they just are like, nah, you don't really need to, because traditionally it's not even, like, it doesn't even really use plums anymore, so you don't even need to do it. That it's just the name. And that just made me like a bit annoyed, because I went through the trouble of really trying to find plums here and trying to do it exactly how Hannah did it, which was actually using plums. And then they don't even do it in the movie. And also, that plum pudding in one of the scenes is this perfectly dark chocolatey brown color, and I'm just like, that is not what it looked like when I made it. And I followed the recipe almost to a T, with the exception of it being prunes instead of plums. Everything else was the same, and it was not that color, and it was super deceiving. So there's my little rant about the actual plum pudding. And then when Courtney samples it at the Christmas tree lot, when she takes a bite of it, it looks like there's just like regular frosting on it, like it's a regular frosted cake. Like it doesn't even look like the cream, and it didn't even look like plum pudding. It just looked like a regular cake. Ugh. But anyways, I digress. In the end, Hannah is almost killed by trying to get information without backup, just like in the book. And she finally kisses Mike. Earlier in the story, she goes on a date with Norman, and at the end of that date, she kisses Norman. So at this point, she's finally kissed both of them, but she does not give away any information on who's the better kisser or what those experiences meant to her. So we're just gonna have to keep watching to see how those feelings develop in the movies. Overall, the movie and the book was very similar. They still got all the main plot points in there. The main differences were just because they needed to set the timeline that this is the second movie, not the 12th movie like it is the 12th book in the series. So they had to change a few things for that to make sense. The next book that they do is Peach Cobbler Murder, and Peach Cobbler is actually a number 8 or 9, I'll have to double check, but it's a lot earlier on than Plum Pudding Murder was, so we are still going to be having some details not quite caught up to the books when you are watching the movie versions. So as long as you know that it's not exactly the same, I don't really think that makes that much of a difference though, because whether you're reading the books or watching the movie or both, you're getting slightly different experiences, but the main ideas are still there. The murders are still there. The main characters are all still the same. The names are all still the same, with the exception that they are still calling Lake Eden Eden Lake, when in the books the name is Lake Eden. And I read somewhere that further down the line of these movies they do change the name back to Lake Eden, so we'll see if that's accurate when I watch those ones. I just have to be careful because since they are changing the timeline slightly from the books, I don't want to end up watching a movie that reveals something that happens later in the books. And I mean, so far they're slowing down the timeline versus speeding it up, but I just want to be careful because I'm so far invested into these that I don't want there to be anything that gets spoiled for me because I'm watching the movie versions of these before finishing all of the books. But I'm about halfway through, so we'll see how far I can get to, and yeah. So thank you for watching. If you're interested in watching the movie, it is on Hallmark Plus, or maybe just regular Hallmark, that you can also watch it. That's where I watched this one, was Hallmark. And so if you would like to watch Plum Pudding Murder, 'tis the season. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.